Hello, everybody. Today, we're talking about human resources. Most people that you are going to meet have had some experiences with human resources. I'd venture to say everybody does. Everybody has either applied for a job or worked in an organization that has a human resources department. It's one of those divisions, departments, units that people have had interactions related not only for employment, but also their personal lives as well. Whether that's health insurances, or maybe they went back to college and got some money from their organization. That flowed through human resources. Or they get an evaluation on how well they did in their job. Or they're looking for a promotion or more money. Or they've gotten hurt on the job. They got hurt outside of the job, but it's impacted their ability to do their job. So we can see that if you've ever had a job, or if you've ever created a business that grows into some size, that you're going to have some understanding of human resources and its impact within the organization. For the most part, we hope human resources has a positive impression. If it has a positive impression with an employee, that may mean that the employee is going to work harder in their organization. They're going to be more loyal to that organization because they feel that not only are they a part of that organization, but they feel well taken care of by those who run and manage that organization. So what is human resources? What should we understand about human resources? Human resources, the best definition I've come up with, is that it optimizes human potential. The singular focus of human resources today is to get the best value we can get out of employees. The biggest bang for our buck. Today, that often means that we have fewer employees. In fact, some would say the goal of human resources is to reduce, on a continual basis, the amount of employees that we have in an organization. Is that true? I think largely it may be. We have so many statistics that talk about this movement in our fields to more robots and artificial intelligence. In fact, 88% of jobs lost today are because we don't need a human to do that job. In fact, human resources, when they used to look at recruiting and selecting employees, the key word was employees. Now, one of the tasks of human resources is who and what needs to be hired or bought in order to accomplish that objective. Kind of a tough statement. What it means is, do we need a human or an inhuman? Inhuman is a term that I came up with that references a robot or artificial intelligence. So a human resource professional today is looking at a job that needs to be done or a job that needs to be filled because someone has left. And now they're asking themselves, do we need a human to do that job? Or can we get a robot? Is there some technology that allows us to do that job? One of the easiest examples is a kiosk at nearly any restaurant that we go to today, from Taco Bell to McDonald's. No longer do those restaurants want you to go up to the counter to order your food. In fact, they just want you to go up to a computer and type in what you want. Some restaurants, Domino's comes to mind, Subway comes to mind, they give you added incentives if you order online even before you get into the store. They simply don't want somebody to wait for you to come in and take your order. They want you to send that order in. It eliminates quite a bit of employment for a firm, which of course then raises their profits. Human resources would have been involved in the determination of how best to take somebody's order in a restaurant as opposed to paying somebody to do it, i.e. now we'll just have a kiosk. Or we'll do it through an app. And then we'll give incentives for customers to continue to use that app. All is involved with optimizing human potential, getting the most out of the employees that we have, so maybe we don't have to hire more employees. This is quite different than when human resources was created. Human resources goes back hundreds of years, of course. You may even say it goes back 1,000 years. Whenever you had a group of employees, and we didn't call them then, but a group of employees working together, you needed somebody to manage them. It didn't really become a profession, though, until about the 1800s. In the 1700s, about 90% of people, employees, worked on family farms. I am from a family farm. My parents are farmers. And I know from a little child, I was out there working in the fields, whether it was driving a tractor or whether it was doing irrigation. That's the way that I was raised. In the 1700s, over 90% of people worked that way, and that was mainly because we didn't have refrigeration or transportation. So what was grown had to be eaten fairly quickly, so it was a continual cycle. Well, what happened in the 1800s is the Industrial Revolution. Other types of technology, too, came out that at least lessened or reduced the burden of so many people working in farming. We were able to maximize the ability to grow more with fewer people. Those fewer people moved to the cities. That's where the jobs are, but also technology was creating factories. It was the rise of factories. And these factories needed people to work in them. That was about the 1800s in that century. And so as more people moved to work on these factories, you needed an individual or a group of individuals to manage those people. Not necessarily supervisors and managers, but you needed somebody to hire and fire and discipline and compensate them and to be concerned with their safety. That was really the first growth of human resources. That growth continued until the early 1900s, when there was another sea change in the way in which people were managed on their job and the role of human resources. For so many years, unfortunately, people were not treated well. That was the era of child labor, where people would work many hours during the day without overtime, and yes, children would work many hours in the day rather than going to school. And as a result, employees said, this is not fair, it's not right, it's not just, it's not equitable. And so they started to band together and say, we need better working conditions. That was the rise of unions. And as the unions gained prominence, you needed some individuals in the organization to work with the unions so that one represented employees, the unions, and one represented management, and that was human resources. It was the birth of the labor relations movement. It also increased the importance of HR. From there, the next seminal event that happened was in the 1960s, which was the Civil Rights Act. Civil Rights Act, also known as Title VII, was passed by President Johnson. It said it's discriminatory to make a decision based on any other factor other than can somebody do their job. So we didn't want to take into account their age, their race, their ethnicity, later the disabilities. We didn't want to take any of those factors into consideration as to whether they should or should not have that job. They should or should not get disciplined for performing or not performing that job. All those decisions should be based on the person's ability to do the job. We call that business necessity or job related. And this law says if you make any decision other than a business necessity or job related designation on a person, if you include any other factor like their age, like their race, like their gender, then that is discriminatory. And of course, you need somebody to manage that. Enter, again, the growth in the role of HR. The next big jump in HR was in the 1990s with sexual harassment. There's a lady by the name of Anita Hill who accused a Supreme Court justice of potential of sexual harassment. Shortly after, there was an event at Tailhook, and Tailhook was a Navy-sponsored, or at least a Navy-affiliated conference. And at this conference, there was some negative interactions between men and women that led to sexual harassment allegations. And both of those issues together highlighted the importance of avoiding any type of sexual discrimination in the workplace. And it transformed, just like the 1960s, it transformed the way the organizations worked in relation to the employees who worked within the organization. Again, it increased the role of HR. And that continued just a few short years after that with the ADA and FMLA. ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, and the FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act, are seminal laws within our profession which talk about that those who have a disability have the same rights as people who don't have a disability. For years, organizations would not hire a person because they had a perceived or a real disability. And that's so unfortunate, especially coming from those who have family members that have a disability. Those individuals are just as able to perform those duties, maybe with some type of an accommodation, and they should be given the same chance that anybody else without a disability should have. Family Medical Leave Act came into event because if somebody had a serious health condition for themselves or their family, some were just losing their jobs. So if you had a heart attack or an auto accident, the employers were firing you. And the government said, that's not right, it's not just, it's not equitable, it's not the type of society we want to have. These laws, which came in from President Bush and President Clinton, greatly enhanced the role of HR and also made the workplace a better place to work. In the 2000s, there really was this focus on recruiting, training, and motivating employees that are committed to doing as much as possible as they can. There was this emphasis on efficiency and effectiveness. We just don't want to hire a position when it's vacant. We want to look as to whether that position is needed. Very similar to maximizing human potential. And the last true growth of HR is really just occurring now, which is this movement to the remote workplace and the use of robots and artificial intelligence. We expect by 2030 that about 34-35% of jobs are going to be lost because they're not going to be needed anymore. Can you imagine if you look at 100% of the jobs and 34% are gone? Not replaced with other jobs, but just gone because we don't need them anymore because technology is going to be able to do those jobs for us. Again, it's going to be a sea change for an organization and a sea change for HR. There still will be an HR. HR is a fantastic profession. But we're going to be looking at how we can get the work done. It's not necessarily from a human perspective, but how can we get the job done? I believe that the future of human resources is not with the word human in it. It may just be resources. As I mentioned earlier about inhuman resources, we have human and inhuman, and we're going to be looking at HR as how best we can get the job done. It reminds me some years ago when we had trains, and the people who were running trains thought that that was their business, to manage the train system. They didn't realize that cars were coming into play. They also didn't realize that they're in the transportation business, not the train business. Had they remembered they're in the transportation business, they would have seen the growth from trains to automobiles, and they may have moved their resources into automobiles. It's the same with HR. Our business isn't necessarily human resources anymore. Our business is resources. And the more that we can transition to certainly this human aspect of the job, but also realizing that there's other ways to get the job done, that will increase our importance, value, and relevance in the organization. What are our duties? Most of us know what these duties are. It's the recruitment and selection. It is the classification and compensation. Classify is writing down what the job's going to do. Compensation is based on what you wrote down as to what the job's going to do. This is how much we think that job should be compensated. Performance evaluation, that is to verify whether somebody is doing the job that we need them to do in order for the organization to meet its objectives. Employee discipline now should be preceded by investigations. We have many more investigations today than maybe at any time previously. We're a very, in the United States, litigious agency and organization and country. We have, at one point I heard that we had more attorneys per capita than almost any other country in the world. So we have quite a few individuals in the legal profession. And of course, when you have quite a few people in the legal profession, it's almost like a domino effect that you're going to have more lawsuits. Health and safety has to do with risk management, making sure that those who work in the workplace are taken care of, and that we create a workplace that is conducive to a person's well-being, and it doesn't inhibit or cause danger to their physical or emotional well-being. Labor relations, as we mentioned, came about because of this movement in the 1920s towards a more union-based. We in the United States don't have a very large union presence. It's only about 6 or 7% in the private sector. But in the public sector, about 40% is unionized. We don't expect to see a tremendous increase in unionization, especially as fewer employees may be continuing in their professions. And we talked about maximizing employee productivity and also organizational well-being. Having an effective HR department will hopefully allow you to avoid some issues. This is almost the opposite of what we talked about earlier. So we won't spend a considerable amount of time on it, but it does, as an HR professional that is fully informed on how to do their job, it does allow an organization to avoid hiring the wrong person, to avoid having high turnover. Turnover can be good, though, but this is the unnecessary and unneeded turnover. Sometimes it's good to have turnover for those that you maybe don't want to continue in your firm. Those that you do, it can be problematic. Court proceedings are very expensive. Even if you are right as an organization, it's terribly expensive. You certainly don't want to have employees feeling that they're treated unfairly and inequitably, and that's a focus that we've seen in the last couple years. It should have been a focus some years ago. It wasn't, but we are focusing on it much more in organizations. A bit late, but thankfully it's something that we're addressing. And that brings us to the overall role of HR in an organization. There's three. We'll talk about what effective HR means. In other words, how to do your job well. But in general, there's three real roles or duties of HR in an organization. One is to provide this advice and counsel. We are an in-house consultant to management. Our true value as an HR professional comes from the valued information, guidance, consultations that we provide to those in the organization. Not just managers and supervisors, not just those in senior management, but also employees as well. I was talking to an employee a couple days ago. They're trying to do their job well. They don't have the necessary tools, and so we're providing that person with the tools in order to do their job well. So that's a great example of where we're providing the advice and counsel. It means that we have to have this type of knowledge, this reservoir of knowledge ourselves as HR professionals. And if we can have that and maintain that, then our value in that organization can grow exponentially. Service makes sense. We just talked about that in the last slide. This is where we do the recruiting, training, programs, and benefits. So many of these duties are being outsourced and they're being contracted out. You won't find many organizations that do their own benefits. They usually contract with the firm. In relation to safety, our risk management, most have a risk management firm that they deal with. So many of the individual functions may not be performed by HR and their professionals, but they still have to manage those components. So that's something that will continue to be of issue in the future. And last is this assessing organizational health. And we talked about this over the preceding slides, but really what we're talking about is how best can we as HR professionals manage the organization so it achieves its objectives. The management of an organization determines the direction that they want to go. They go to individuals like human resource managers and directors and says, this is where we need to go, find the people that help us get there. That's what assessing the organizational health is. Of these roles, I see that there's three primary contributions that HR is leading. First is this acquisition of talented employees. We may have fewer of them, but we need this acquisition of talented employees. I call them superstars, and we'll talk about them towards the end of this presentation. Second is to continue to reduce the cost of employees. Whatever it takes, whatever can be done to reduce the cost of employees. I'm not promoting this, by the way, as an individual, but in our profession, we are looking for, and our value as an HR professional is exponentially greater if we can showcase that we are saving an organization money by virtue of how we manage these resources. And last, to figure out a way to replace employees with robots and artificial intelligence. Yep, to figure out a way. Figure out any way that we can reduce the cost of employees. And it's not just the cost of employees that's becoming, in other words, their compensation, but it's also the legal aspects of employees. It's about their health costs. The cost of just employment has grown to such a degree that it's impacting a firm's ability to maintain themselves as a viable concern. Just a couple more slides. Skills of an HR, there's basically two. You got to know your business and you got to know HR. So if you're in journalism as an HR manager, you have to understand journalism. If you're in working for the post office, you got to understand mail, and you also have to understand HR. So the second bullet is just make sure that you know HR, and we know all of the bullets related to HR. Then the second part is make sure that you have a very good mastery of the business so that you can apply what you've learned in HR into the specific business. HR is different if you work at Google than if you work at General Motors. And you need to adapt your mindset to those differences. One key difference is General Motors is union-based. Google, some of the others may not be to the level that General Motors is. I'll talk a bit more about this in really the last slide. There's a quote on the final slide, but this really is the slide that may be the most important. We're certainly going to spend quite a few minutes on it. And this is how to be an effective human resources, what we can do to be good at our job. First is we do have to be an expert in the HR fundamentals. Talked about that in the last slide. Second is to be an expert in your business. Talk about these just a bit more. HR fundamentals is in law and services. How best that we can do the responsibilities of HR. Do we need to do a recruitment, or should we hire a headhunter? Those are some examples of decisions that have to be made. Can we do an investigation of an employee, or do we have to bring in an attorney or somebody who is an expert in that field? So we have to clearly understand our value in consulting and contracting. Our advice and counsel, which we talked about sometime earlier, is really predicated on our ability to have our knowledge of not only these HR fundamentals, but also how it applies to the specific business in question. A couple of the others come from years of experience in HR. And this first one is about relationships. HR is a relationship-built business. Your success and failure often rises on your ability to build relationships with key people in an organization. If you work in the public sector like I did for some years, you have to build relationships with your unions. In one case, we had, I think, 15 different unions. And the better relationship you develop with those unions, the better chance you have of having conducive, productive relationships between management and their employees. So what builds a relationship? It may sound trite, but being a nice person, being a nice guy. Be likable, nice, even fun. That builds relationships. More than anything, there's a bullet there that says credibility. Especially with labor relations, management, your word is your bond. Your ability to not only determine the right course of action, but to stay true and firm to your course of action can result in a level of credibility that greatly enhances your influence in an organization. So you build relationships, and as a result of those relationships, you also build credibility. They're very similar. They're the heads and tails of a coin. Without credibility, it's difficult to build relationships, and without relationships, it's difficult to build credibility. Both are key contributors to an HR professional's success in an organization. The next one is one I follow so often, which is to solve problems early. There's an expression to kick the issue down, or kick the can down the road. And that basically means is I'm not going to deal with the problem until it becomes a problem that I have to deal with. It's the opposite in HR. If you don't deal with employees and their unions, then you have unfair labor practices and grievances, and then get into arbitrations and mediation, and that consumes a tremendous amount of time. The earlier that you can solve a problem, the better chance you have of ensuring that problem does not become so impactful that it dominates your time and interferes with or prevents an organization from achieving its overall objectives. So solving problems as early as possible. That comes from relationships. That comes from credibility. Last but not least is this concept of always be right. I say this quite a bit, and people say, well, we can't always be right. In our profession, hopefully, I've gotten across that it is one that has a tremendous impact on an employee. Even an applicant, somebody applying for a job that doesn't get the job, that could be the difference between them moving from one neighborhood to another, one house to another, putting their children in a good school or a better school, getting a new car, going on vacation. You can see the impact of that decision that can have on a person's life and lifestyle. If you discipline somebody but the investigation was done poorly or there was a bias in the investigation, you can greatly impede a person's ability to meet their ambitions in their life. So I've always taken that as a tremendous responsibility when I've consulted in human resources, that yes, we have to make difficult and tough decisions, even traumatic ones, but we have to make decisions based on a clear understanding of the issues and without any type of bias and influence that ensures that the wrong decision was made because of some kind of nefarious aims. In HR, we have to be right. That means we have to take the extra time, consult widely before we publish a decision. Even decisions about how much we're going to contribute to a person's retirement or healthcare can have dramatic, consequential decisions on a person's future. For those reasons, always be right is really a key to HR. And the last slide, which really talks about an area that is important to me. I believe that the hiring, selection, and promotion of the superstar may be the single most important contributor to the health and wealth of any organization ever created. When I say the superstar, people say, well, what is the superstar? Only one? No, it could be more. It could be the superstars. Organizations of the future are going to be run, if not dominated, by those few individuals who have a level of skill, knowledge, and ability that far surpasses anyone else. How do we become that type of person? Educate ourselves widely, certainly consult greatly with those people who have been success. But then, at the end, there's three things that I think determine and create the superstar. Work hard, be kind, and never give up. With that, hopefully, it provides some background on HR. Hopefully, you've enjoyed the presentation. Look forward to hearing from you in the future. Take care, everybody.